Good evening. Oh my, that's loud. I won't be that close to it. We'd like to ask you to please take your seats. We'd like to get our program underway on time because we have an awesome panel for you tonight and a very full program. First of all, we want to welcome everybody. Thank you to coming to the first forum presented by Women's City Club in our 2018-19 program year. Tonight's program is co-sponsored with a lot of help and support from the AMOS project. You want to raise your hand, any representatives? Anybody from the AMOS project? There you are. The AMOS project, Cincinnatus Association. Anybody? All right, lots of Cincinnatus folk. And the Ohio Justice and Policy Center. My name is Janet Buning. I am president of Women's City Club this year. Very excited to be asked to serve in that capacity because some of the most amazing women and men that I know are part of this group. If you're not a member of Women's City Club, we'd like you to be. And you can do that by talking to that nice lady over there, Ann Scove. She is our office manager. She really runs the club. They just call me the president. And she can help you get all signed up and tell you all the things you need to know about Women's City Club. We always welcome new members. Before we start our panel tonight, we have two big events that I want to tell you about so you can plan on coming to those too. On Friday, September 28th, downtown on Fountain Square, starting at 11:30, running until 1:30, we have our 5th annual Women's Expo. It's an economic, physical, and mental health expo. There will be lots of organizations there having tables, there will be presentations. Our speakers will include Kathy Bailey from Cincinnati Waterworks, the director, Tamaya Denard, one of our city council members, Dr. Jill Bly, a member of Women's City Club, and probably a few more that we just don't know about yet. So that's a really wonderful thing, totally free. Come on down to Fountain Square, Friday, September 28th, starting at 11:30. The next really cool thing, and this is way off in the future, but we are so excited to tell you that for our National Speaker Forum that we do in spring, this year's speaker is Helen Thorpe. And you may say, who is that? But you're going to hear more about her. She was just nominated for the Dayton Literary Peace Prize. She's one of the finalists in nonfiction for a wonderful book she has written called The Newcomers. And she will be our national speaker on April 3rd down at Memorial Hall. And we want you all to know about that because she's going to be really amazing. So 2 real quick things in October, lots of things to put in your calendar. We have another program that we are co-sponsoring on Monday, October 8th called Who Are You to Judge? This is being held at the Urban League building on Reading Road. Starts at 5:30, actually starts at 6, doors open at 5:30. And this one is presented with the Bar Association, the Urban League, Women's City Club, League of Women Voters, and Community Police Partnering Center. This is a big deal, your chance to meet all the judicial candidates. And then on Wednesday, October 17th, Women's City Club is back here again, same space, same time. And our program that night will be called Charting the City's Future. A look at all the proposed city charter amendments. Our speakers will include Don Mooney talking about one of the charter amendments. I should know which one, I've just gone blank on that. Rena, what's Don talking about? Which one is he? LLCs, that's right, about not being able to make campaign donations without revealing who you are. And if you're here, I'm sorry, we went to high school together and he's gonna kill me for that, not remembering his job. And then Carolyn Miller will be there and city council people will be there talking about their proposed amendments for changing the council terms. So lots of good things going on, but right now it's time to get started with tonight's program. I want to thank Amy Katzman, who is our Vice President in charge of programming. Where are you, Amy? Over there. And her committee, especially Susan Noonan, who stepped in and did a lot of extra work when Amy was having some tech issues this week. And we're going to turn it over to our Vice President for Civic Engagement, Rena Saperstein, who's going to run the rest of the program. Thank you again for coming. We hope to see you back on October 17th.
Hi again, thanks for coming. I'm Rena Saperstein. My job today is to introduce the format and the speakers, and the format is designed with the hope that you will be able to hear both the opportunities and challenges of issue 1 and go to the polls informed. We are live streaming this thanks to Together We Will, and that the live stream is available now and will be available in the future on the Women City Club's webpage and League of Women Voters webpage and Together We Will webpage. And we have a timekeeper with the red hair in the front, Shirley Mall. She'll be giving our folks their times at 5 minutes till and 1 minute till they need to wrap up. The program for today, there are materials on the back table that talk about the pros and cons of issue 1 and who the various supporting and opposing organizations are. We have some wonderful speakers today. I'm just going to introduce them by name, and then they can tell you more about themselves as we go into the program. Each side will have 20 minutes to talk. First 20 minutes about supporting issue 1, and then 20 minutes opposing issue 1, and then we'll have 10 minutes for each side to respond to what they heard in the previous conversation. And then hopefully we'll have about 15 minutes or so for you guys to ask questions. We only have one microphone, so we will all have to share and pass it around, and I will repeat any questions that get asked. So it's 7:10 now. Our speakers supporting issue 1 are Stephen Johnson Grove, an attorney and the Deputy Director for Policy of Ohio Justice and Policy Center, and Elizabeth Hopkins, a community organizer and staff lead for the AMOS project. And I will let them tell you about issue 1.
Hello everyone, my name is Elizabeth Hopkins and I am the lead organizer for the AMOS project.
All right, hello, I'm Stephen Johnson Grove. As she said, I'm an attorney with the Ohio Justice Policy Center. I'm one of the authors of issue 1. And this is a campaign that was built by Ohioans for Ohioans over 2 years. It actually started in 2009 when I first met AMOS, when we started working on things like ban the box, fair hiring policies, lots of things in and around the criminal justice system, mostly trying to remove barriers for people that used to be in the criminal justice system, removing job barriers. We won the very first fair hiring policy in the state here in Cincinnati in 2010. And then after that, we went on to it in 14 other cities and have done many other pieces of legislation to remove barriers so people with felony records can get jobs. But through all that work, we really got frustrated by how many people were being thrown away in the justice system, how many people that didn't belong ever in prison and were being harmed because of it. Families and communities are being decimated because of the overuse, the over-reliance on incarceration. And that's what drove this campaign. It was really a really simple question. Can we make our communities more healthy and more safe by using less incarceration? That was really what fueled us. And it was grassroots folks and policy experts like myself, attorneys, and politically inclined people all across this state, not just in Cincinnati, that worked together to come up with the ideas that boiled down to what you now have in front of you called issue 1. This is a very long labor of love. So I'll give you a really quick overview of what issue 1 does, now that you know a little bit about how we got to where we are. Number 1, which a lot of people are talking about, is that issue 1 will take the lowest level drug possession felonies, F4s and F5s, and convert them into misdemeanors. So for any substance, in Ohio we have substances, 4th and 5th degree felonies are set based on weight or quantity. So it's the lowest quantity levels, generally the possession levels at the 4th and 5th degree, are going to be converted into misdemeanors. That can be done both prospectively and retroactively. So somebody with a 20, 30, 40-year-old drug possession offense, that's one of these lower level drug possession offense, could petition to the court to have that reclassified down to a misdemeanor, thereby removing the felony, thereby removing all the barriers that come with having a felony, jobs and housing, what have you. So that's number 1. Number 2, and issue 1 does 4 things. So that's number 1. Number 2, probation violations. So do you know 23% of the people going to prison every year are going for probation violations that are not new felonies. So they're on probation for a felony. They committed a felony, they're on probation, and these 4,700 people from all around this state are filling up Ohio's prisons every year because of just probation violations that are either a new misdemeanor or a just rule violation. Okay, so not a new crime, missing a meeting, testing dirty urine with a drug screen. Sometimes not making payments because you're supposed to make payments when you're on probation. By the way, it's hard to get a job when you're on probation and have a felony. So those are the kinds of things that can cause a probation violation that is not a new crime. And we're saying those things should not end up in state prison. We, throughout this entire amendment, we are 100% in support of accountability, just not accountability that looks like a prison cage. That is a waste of time and a waste of state resources and really a waste of human life. It really damages people and it's really unnecessary. So that's the probation violation piece. Number 3, the amendment will encourage rehabilitation by expanding Ohio's existing earned credit program. We want people to earn their way out of prison, not just be let out. And in the issue 1, we take the, let me back this up. There are 40 states in this country that have some kind of earned credit program. So this is not a wild, crazy idea. There's a lot of states do this, where you can take a program, take a class, work in the prison system, and by doing that, shave some time off your sentence. Of the 40 states that have a program like that, we are the stingiest. We give the least amount of time to the fewest number of people. So what we're doing with issue 1 is expanding it, getting us more into like the median, the average range of what states are doing with earned credit. We would allow people to earn 1 day off their sentence for every 2 days of programming. And it's worth noting, every single one of the people that's going to benefit from this earned credit program are people that have an out date. They are coming out. Believe me, they are getting out of prison at some point. The question is when and how prepared. That's what issue 1 is trying to encourage, more preparation, better preparation for the people that are working the hardest at their rehabilitation in prison. So those 3 things, this is where number 4 comes in, those 3 things will drive down the prison population in the first year, we think, by about 10,000. And the best part of the amendment is we attach a formula. Each person not in prison, because of these reforms, we have $1 per person per day formula that rolls up, and the legislature must allocate those resources on an annual basis. 70% of that money gets reallocated to drug treatment. So it's really big and simple. People and money out of prison and into healing. More safety with healing, less safety with incarceration. For 50 years, we've been experimenting with mass incarceration. It hasn't worked. It hasn't healed addiction. It hasn't reduced crime. Incarceration as a tool does not work. We know this. We have 50 years of evidence to show us that. This amendment is taking us in a new direction, in a meaningful, substantive, and very safe, thoughtful way. So the money that gets reinvested out of this amendment, 70% goes into drug treatment, 15% goes into trauma recovery for crime survivors, so healing the very people that have suffered from crime. And then the last 15% is essentially for the system, for the drug courts, for the mental health courts, for the probation departments. They're going to need to shift or expand in order to better serve people, that last 15% of the money. So we think that because of 10,000 fewer people being in prison, and because of the formula that's put into our amendment, we'll have at least $100 million. The Policy Matters Ohio, it's an independent nonprofit up in Cleveland that does a lot of really evidence-based, really thoughtful budget analysis. Their estimate is that it could be as much as $136 million. So somewhere in that range, 100 million, 136 million. So 70% of that, again, drug treatment, 15% trauma recovery for crime survivors, and 15% into system change type investments. But the really important part of issue 1 is not all this blah, blah, blah. Okay, because I can talk till the cow comes home about every single word in this thing because I helped write it. But what matters more is the people this is going to impact. And that's where I want Elizabeth to share, spin off any piece of this and share some more about why you're in this fight.
Thank you, Stephen. So, how many people in this room have been affected by the war on drugs or the opioid epidemic? How many people know someone? And please don't be shy. Thank you. Me too. So over the past 2 years, I've buried 3 of my friends to opioid epidemic overdoses. All 3 of them had done stints in jail around this. One of them, who was like my first love, he did 5 months on a drug-related charge and got out and within 24 hours was overdosed and dead. And to me, And to me, if those 5 months in the detention center would have rehabilitated him, he would still be here. We know that incarcerating people who are suffering from a disease, which is addiction, does not work. We know that it doesn't heal people. We know that it doesn't save people's lives. I am a living testimony to that. And we also know that we haven't reimagined what it can look like without incarceration. We live in a world that believes that law and order keeps us safe, We live in a world that believes that people who have done crimes, specifically crimes of hiding their pain with substances, deserve to pay their time. But for me as a person of faith, I'm of the Christian faith, and my faith compels me to say that that is simply not true. My faith compels me to say that each person has inherent value and worth and dignity. And it doesn't matter if you're struggling with addiction or not, they deserve to be restored. For me, issue 1 does that, because it doesn't just look at people like me, who have suffered with addiction in the past, as someone who is expendable, as someone who deserves to be punished, as someone who is less than. But it looks at me and people like me as people who can be restored and redeemed, as people who are healable and worthy of love, and worthy of treatment, and worthy of change. I'm only here because people believed that I could change. And I wish I could say the same for my friends who are no longer here. Issue 1, to me, is a testament to the 730,031 signatures that we got to put it on the ballot. It's a testament to the 24,000 signatures that we got here in Hamilton County. It's a testament to the way that people across the state of Ohio believe. And we're not saying that judges and prosecutors don't have their place, because they do. But what we're saying is that addiction doesn't get treated by putting someone in a jail cell. It simply doesn't. Because if it did, again, my friends would still be here. It gets treated by actually giving people the opportunities to have access to treatment, to have access to life-saving programs. It gets treated by actually viewing people as human enough to figure out why they're using in the first place. And the expansion of mental health treatment, the expansion of trauma care for people like me, the expansion of the ability to earn your way out of a long jail sentence, those things are paramount to what Ohioans actually want and need when they figure out what issue 1 does. It doesn't make us any safer to put someone inside of a jail cell and then have them come out as a hardened criminal. It doesn't. It makes them safer, and it makes our society safer and healthier if we can actually go in and restore that person. And yes, they need to want to get treated, right? They do. But when you get put into a jail cell and told that you're just a number, and that you don't actually have a purpose, and then you have a felony, and then you get out and society tells you that you're not worth housing, you're not worth food, you're not worth health care, you're not worth being able to live with your family. Those things are reinforced time and time again, and so people go back to using. If you can't get a job because you have a drug possession felony, what are you supposed to do? The court doesn't have an answer for that. Doesn't have a response for that. These are human issues, and they need to be solved by humans. And 730,000 Ohioans decided to support issue 1, to say that we believe that this is the way that we do this. And so for me, it's a no-lose situation with issue 1. For me, I only see redemption, I only see restoration, I only see hope for the hundreds of people, thousands of people across the state of Ohio who have drug possession felonies that will actually be able to be in society, right? Having a job, being upstanding citizens, having their worth back and their dignity back, being able to be reunited with their families. This is about something more than just the carrot and stick. This is about something more than just using a cell to punish someone. This is about who are we as human beings? What does this actually look like when we come together and say that this is what we want? We want something new. We want a new way to handle addiction, especially in Ohio, it's been hit the worst.
If we have any time left, we yield it.
All right, we'll have more for questions and answers at the
Yes,
end.
that's right.
All right, thank
Go
you.
ahead.
All right, so
Thank you.
speaking to oppose it, I'll just give you a quick brief introduction, and then we'll start at 7:20 here. Mark Piesmeyer, Chief Trial Counsel, Hamilton County Prosecutor's Office, and the Honorable Jody Lubers, Judge of Hamilton County Common Pleas Court and founder of the Hamilton County Mental Health Court.
Well, Judge West and I founded the mental health court in the municipal court, in the Common Pleas Court division. I can't take full credit because it was really his idea, and I just jumped on the bandwagon because he did all the work. So, my name is Jody Lubers. I've been a Common Pleas judge for 10 years now. I did help start the mental health court 9 years ago. Very proud of that. I'm against issue one, and here's why. The statement in the amendment, first, I don't like that it's called the Neighborhood Safety Drug Treatment and Rehabilitation Amendment, because I don't think that's really fair, because everybody wants to vote for that. I'd vote for something that had that name on it, but it's a little misleading. A lot of the things in this amendment are good. I do not send drug possessors on a first offense to prison, and I don't think any of our judges do that. In fact, by statute, we are not allowed to. There are felony 4 or felony 5, you're not allowed to send a drug possessor to prison. You're simply not allowed. So we can't do that now anyway, but we don't do that. I mean, I don't like sending people to prison. Well, there are some people I do like sending to prison who are murderers and rapists and burglars who are a danger to our society, we've tried to help and do not. But most people, it's a heavy thing to send somebody to prison. It's not easy. It's not something you want to do. It's a last resort, and it is to save the community. And it is a punishment for what they've done. But that's not what this issue really is about, okay? This issue is not clear and concise. It has some really good ideas, but this constitutional amendment, it's not exact. There are a lot of uncertainties. There are a lot of unclarities about this, and they take away a lot of discretion from the legislature and the court and give to the Department of Rehabilitation, and I don't think that's where any of us want it to go. They are not the people to decide. They're not elected officials, and I don't know how they're held accountable. So just to start off with, this amendment states that all drugs, any drug and every drug that is possessed will be a misdemeanor of the first degree. The real problem we have in our community, I think, and I think you all agree with me, is even my opponents, we have an opiate addiction problem in this community, in the whole country really. And it's primarily heroin, but mostly fentanyl. Because fentanyl is the most dangerous drug out there. I've never seen anything like it. It is the most powerful drug, the most deadly drug, an extremely addictive drug, and that's really the problem that we have in our society. We have so many overdoses that are due to fentanyl, and I have some statistics here for you. Find my little cheat sheet. The drug overdose deaths in Ohio increased from 3,050 in 2015 to 4,050 in 2016. That's 4 times the number of people who die in a traffic accident in Ohio. That's a problem. It's a huge problem. We all agree with that. 58.2% of the overdose deaths in Ohio in 2016 involved fentanyl, compared to only about 4% in 2013. That's a dramatic increase in the use of fentanyl. 50 times more potent than heroin is fentanyl. 2 grams of fentanyl, which is an amount, it's a teeny amount. It's the amount that would like cover the head of Abraham Lincoln on a penny. That amount is enough to kill the average person. Fentanyl is so addictive, it's lethal, it's so easy to manufacture, it's easy to smuggle from country to country, it's easy to transport, to send in mailings. You know, there was that problem up in the prison a few weeks ago. It's a problem not just for abusers, but for people who come in contact with it accidentally, and that includes police department, medical personnel, and anywhere else where it might be handled by anybody, mail carriers, first responders. It's really a very serious risk. Issue 1 would make the possession of powdered fentanyl in an amount less than 20 grams a misdemeanor, with only probation as the consequence. That means a drug offender who's caught with less than 20 grams walks away with no possibility of jail time at all. So what's wrong with this amendment is it says that every drug that is possessed becomes a misdemeanor. I don't think people with fentanyl in amounts of 19 grams or less should walk away with a misdemeanor. Marijuana, of course not, that's already a misdemeanor. Maybe there are other drugs, maybe cocaine, maybe other drugs. I agree there should not necessarily be felonies, should be misdemeanors. But the problem with this amendment, as it sounds, it says every single drug. I got a problem with people carrying fentanyl. I got a problem with people walking around with heroin. I do. I hope you do too. So we need to fix this bill. It's not right. It's not a bill. It's not even a bill. It can't be fixed. It's an amendment. If we're gonna make real change in our community with this drug problem, and there's a huge one, we need to do it right. And this is just not right. It's not right. The consequence, or the requirement that probation goes with these types of drugs comes in sentencing. And the offenders know that the judge can't send them to prison. Drug dealers who are selling drugs to these people, or who may carry it and possess them themselves in a small amount, so it's just possession, know that they're not going to prison. So we would be passing one of the most lenient drug possession laws in the country. California has it and they're having problems. Ohio would be next. The most lenient state for carrying and possessing drugs. What is that gonna do? That's gonna bring drug dealers, hey, come on to Ohio. Come on in, because nothing's gonna happen to you. You're gonna walk right out that door. Have you thought about that? I'm concerned about that. That's a huge problem that I see with this bill. Now, we have a wonderful drug court, we have a wonderful mental health court, and those courts are really successful. Those deal with people who possess drugs, and we put them into treatment. And you're absolutely right, you gotta want it, treatment. I can order you into treatment, but if you don't want it, you go through the motions, you don't really do it, you're gonna be back out using in a second. You are, it's the reality, it's true, and everyone knows that. It's nice to have an incentive to do the treatment. And you can call it a carrot, it is a carrot, to say, you don't do this treatment, yeah, you're going to jail, and you may go to prison. And yes, that it is an incentive. I personally have seen it. I started the mental health court with Judge West 9 years ago. And I have had participants graduate who are addicted to drugs that I had to send to jail. This one young kid reminded me of my son, it broke my heart. I had to send him to jail, he was non-compliant, he was using again. Was he committing new crimes? He was not. He was not. And I put him in jail, I did. And he did a stint, it broke my heart. It was not for a long period of time. He came back out, he completed our program, and he said, I don't ever want to go to jail again. And I sure as heck don't want to go to prison, because I know prison is a million times worse than jail. And he succeeded that program. In fact, he came back to my court 3 weeks ago and got an expungement. And it's off his record, no record, clean, out working. He's gonna go back to school, to college. He's a really bright kid. He's got a huge future ahead of him, and he's doing great. And I was thrilled to see him come back. And his father came back, and his father thanked him too. I have had parents come to me and say, thank you for sending my child to prison, because you saved his life. If he had not gone to prison, and I'm not talking jail, prison, he would be dead right now, because prison saved his life. He did his term, he hated it, and he's doing great now. And he will never go back to prison, and I have my son back, and I thank you for that. It's not easy to send someone to prison. It is a last resort. Oftentimes people are charged with drug possession and drug trafficking, and oftentimes there's a plea deal that's made, where if you plead to the possession, we're gonna drop the trafficking. It happens all the time. It's a deal, they accept responsibility, and they get their sentence. And there are people right now who are in prison because of that. This bill, I keep calling it a bill, it's an amendment. I wish it was a bill, because I think it would be easier to defeat, but it's an amendment, and you can't do anything about that if it's an amendment. It's very hard to overturn an amendment. I shouldn't say you can't do anything. But there are people in prison who are drug traffickers who have gone up on a drug possession charge, and they're gonna get out, because this is retroactive. You will get out if you're on a drug possession charge according to this bill. And honestly, that's not right. That's not fair. That's not what happened when the plea was done and they went to prison. They got a deal by pleading to the possession instead of the trafficking. That's out the door. That's simply out the door. And, that concerns me about this bill too. Let's see. Our drug courts are gonna go away. The drug courts handle the felony 4s and the felony 5s. The drug courts are really very effective programs. They are not sending people to prison. They're motivating them to do treatment, yeah, with that carrot that you may go to prison, and it works. It works. Drug courts are fabulous in the state. I'm very proud of them. I'm not a drug court, but I do mental health court, and quite honestly, every mental health person that I have is a coexisting disorder, has a drug problem too. They work. We're not sending these people to prison. We're helping them with the motive of, you don't gotta go to prison if you do the treatment, and it works. And this bill will just completely eliminate that. And we've worked so hard at that, and I hate to see that go. Also, this bill says that if you are on probation for a felony and you commit a violation of your probation that's not a new crime, you can't be sent to prison. So if I have a person who I've placed on probation for a domestic violence charge, okay, and part of my sentence to them is that you're on probation and you are to never have contact with this person again, and they have contact with this person, whatever they may do, I can't send them to prison for that. If I order someone to pay restitution because they've done an arson, or they've committed a burglary and stole all this property, or they've wrecked somebody's car, or whatever the issue may be that restitution should be ordered, and they violate my probation, they're not making any payments towards probation, towards restitution, and this person is not being made whole. I mean, no payments, not right away, but nothing for years, for 2 or 3 years you're on probation, you haven't paid a single thing, I'm not allowed to send that person to prison. That the judges lose their discretion, that's my job to decide if a person should go to prison or not. I don't take that lightly. I look at all the circumstances, whether it's appropriate or not. And quite honestly, sometimes it's appropriate. I'm not allowed to do that with this bill. I don't think that's right. I think you all should have a problem with that too. Also with this bill, the credit that you get for half a day, that is for all felons except for rapes, murderers, and I forget what the other one is.
Sex offenders.
No, it does not say sex offenders. I wish it said sex offenders. It does not say that. If you're convicted of a gross sexual imposition, you can get this credit. If you're convicted of an attempted rape, you can get this credit. What about attempted murder? You're in prison for an attempted murder, you can get this credit. You're in prison for an aggravated burglary, you can get this credit. I don't think that's right. I don't agree with that in this bill. And that is exactly what this bill says, and I can tell you what exactly the charges are. There are 3, maybe 4, that are precluded, and it is 4, thank you, murder, rape, or child molestation. It doesn't say sex crimes, and it doesn't say violent crimes. It simply says murder, rape, and child molestation. I don't think those people necessarily should be given credit. Maybe they should, maybe they shouldn't, but I don't think they automatically get credit. And is it the prison who decides that? And what if there's an agreed sentence? There's a plea deal where a defendant pleads to an offense and agrees, I'm gonna serve this period of time. And the state and the victim and the police who are involved also agree this is the time that this person should serve. It comes to the judge who will ultimately decide the sentence, but go very carefully consider that recommendation. So if there is an agreed sentence that a person does 6 years for an offense, and the victim and the police and the defendant all agree to that 6-year term, this goes away with that. I don't think that's fair to the victims or to the community that this approved sentence gets washed away. So I do think there's a lot of good things in this bill. We do need, not a bill, an amendment, we do need some reform about drug possession cases. We need more facilities. We need more drug treatment. It's not just the criminals who possess drugs, they're called a criminal. It's people who use drugs and overdose, because that leads to other problems and other crimes that are committed that they use to get these drugs because heroin and fentanyl are so addictive. And I think it just takes away the judiciary power, and And I just don't think it's right. It's good in theory, but it's not specific enough, and there are a lot of issues that I have with it. So I wish we could cut it out, tear it down, and pass part of it, but not all of it. So those are my primary issues, and I'll pass it on to more people. I'm sorry, I took over too much.
I'm not. I told her when we started, we got 20 minutes, and if you want to take 19 and a half, have at it, Jody. I guess my main perspective, I've been a prosecutor since I started in the law 38 years ago. I went to law school at night. I was teaching at my alma mater, Roger Bacon, and coaching football there. And I got a law degree and figured, why did I do this? I didn't do this to keep teaching high school and coaching football. So got a job in the prosecutor's office, and outside of I was also in the Army Reserves, and back when I was in the Army Reserves, everybody was in the Army Reserve as a side job because nobody ever got activated. And then the Gulf War came along. We had 3 little kids at home, and I was gone for that for a while. So outside of that, I've been in the prosecutor's office the entire time. I think the main thing, or the main point I wanted to make is I, as a prosecutor, we are not demanding that drug abusers go to prison or to jail. We don't have room in our jails for the violent people. So it's just not true. I mean, we are not demanding you did this, or you had this weed, or you had this cocaine, or this heroin, you go to jail. We don't. It's just not true. And I'll say that on a stack of Bibles. 2 main problems I have with this. Number one, as Jody said, rather than have the legislature be able to debate this and tweak little things, you know, another crime that's not mentioned is aggravated murder. Murder's mentioned. The most serious crime, I just finished trying a serial killer for the 2nd time, Anthony Kirkland, technically under this law, because he was convicted and sentenced to death, so I mean, it doesn't really apply to him, but that's the problem with making a constitutional amendment. There's a lot of little things like that in there that, even though you may not be eligible for murder, the most serious offense, aggravated murder, technically you are. This is a take it or leave it law, and that's a concern. There's errors in it. Once it passes, it's a constitutional amendment. It's not that easy to get rid of, and we're stuck with it. And I think everybody agrees and understands there's way to improve our laws in Ohio. We've got a drug court. Mindy Reinhardt, our crack prosecutor, not that she's, I don't want to say crack, that's a bad word to use here, our great prosecutor for drug court, that's all she does. Get people in court, but you've got to have some consequences if you don't do what you're told. Look, we don't want to send you to prison. You've got to get this treatment. And if you don't, or like Jody said, leave this lady alone. Quit calling her up 30 times a night. You're on probation to me. If you call her again, I'm going to have to lock you up. You can't do that with this bill. What's that got to do with drug reform? I don't know. But that's in there. So anybody that doesn't get treatment that they need or doesn't leave the person they've been terrorizing alone and she's got him on probation, all you can say is don't do it again. And if you do, there's nothing you can do about it. Again, this is a very well-intentioned law. Everybody agrees. That's why we've got a drug court. I don't know how many times, we have people call us up that say, can you please get my son or daughter locked up? Because they won't stop using. I've spent $10,000 on programs. They keep running away from there. The only way to keep them from dying is to at least lock them up for a while till they can get clean for a while. A secretary in our office lost her son for that same reason. I think that's one thing about this that touches us, that most people know or have a friend that have had a family member die from this horrible ravage of fentanyl and heroin that's out there. So we're not against some of the reforms proposed by this law, but the way it's written, I agree with Jody, it's going to be a disaster.
Okay, so everybody's heard each other. Now it's a chance to respond to what you've heard and take about 10 minutes to do that.
Thank you. Thanks, Judge, and thanks, Mark. So a couple things about how, one, why we chose a constitutional amendment, and two, how that works after, should it pass, how that implementation works. So Why did we choose a constitutional amendment? 1996, we passed something called Truth in Sentencing. It was this big landmark criminal justice reform thing that was going to transform how we do sentencing in Ohio. One of the reasons was we're going to right-size our criminal justice system. We're going to shrink the prison population and redirect the resources to something that's more productive. That was one of the reasons. There's others. 2000, by the way, the prison population kept climbing. 2011, we introduced something called justice reinvestment. Lots of headlines about that one, all over TV, radio, newspapers. We're going to right-size the prison population. We're going to put fair sentencing in place. We're going to shrink that prison population safely and redirect the resources to something more productive. Prison population stayed high, 50,000 people. We've had 50,000 people in prison since 2007. 2015, the legislature created something called the Criminal Justice Recodification Committee. I know about that thing, you probably don't. Almost no one knows about this thing, but for 2 years, my boss was on it. That's why I know. We drove back and forth to Columbus. 24 other people were on it, including a chief justice, or a justice from the Supreme Court, several prosecutors, several sheriffs, police chiefs, all around the state working on this thing for 2 years to rewrite the criminal code. One of the reasons being to right-size that prison population, so we shrink the prison population safely and redirect resources to something more productive. Do you know how many pieces of legislation came out of that 2-year process? Zip. The people of Ohio are dying at the clip you said, 13 people per day last year. We are done waiting for the legislature to figure this out. We are done waiting, seriously. The people of Ohio have the power to do this under Article 2, Section 1 of the Ohio Constitution, which is the power of direct democracy to initiate constitutional amendments. That's what we're doing. So this is the people of Ohio rising up and saying we need something different. There are the resources to address the opioid epidemic. They're just locked up in the prison budget. We need those dollars out of there and into something that's going to actually work. The politicians that have been spouting the same "we need to punish people" narrative for the last 50 years of the failed war on drugs are at it again. We are done waiting and listening to that narrative. We need a new way. Issue 1 is not radical. It is fairly safe and fairly conservative in terms of the things it's actually doing. But it is going to produce the kind of safety we need out of healing instead of producing it out of a prison cell. And then that's why we went with the constitutional amendment. And then the other thing to reassure you with is how constitutional amendments get implemented. There is going to be rafts of legislation to implement this thing. When a piece of when a constitutional amendment gets put out, then the legislature has to do implementation legislation. For example, the definition of trafficking. Right now, first of all, people with large quantities of fentanyl that are trafficking fentanyl are going to be prosecuted for fentanyl trafficking. They're going to prison for fentanyl trafficking. They're getting penalties for that fentanyl trafficking. We're not touching trafficking, period. Issue 1 does not touch trafficking. But if there's any difficulty for Mr. Piepmeyer or his colleagues to prosecute fentanyl traffickers for trafficking, there are other states that have even more generous definitions of what counts as trafficking, possession with intent to deliver. There are other ways we could do this. Those are the kinds of things the legislature could do. If they need to scoop in more people that they're concerned are actually trafficking, we can do that with legislation. Issue 1 says that people with simple possession, mere possession, nothing else, those folks cannot be sent to state prison if it's at this lowest, the lower possession levels. So people who are addicted, who are possessors for addiction, those are the folks we're trying to prevent from going to prison. People with who are trafficking, we can convict them of trafficking. Judges and prosecutors around the state will have the power to do that with existing law. By the way, federal prosecutors are doing this all the time. I've talked to federal prosecutors who just finished a trafficking case last week of 2 grams of fentanyl. So there's 19 grams kind of boogeyman out there. I just want to say our federal prosecutors and state prosecutors working with our local law enforcement and everyone in between are nailing traffickers and are going to continue to be able to do that. A couple more things about the things that were brought up. The drug courts that are effective and evidence-based in Ohio, 70% of the money we save, that we're talking about saving out of the prison cost savings, that money can be directed to any evidence-based drug treatment program, services, and supports. It's our argument that could include even drug courts. So, and also, as I mentioned, 15% of the money could be dedicated to any system need, court, probation, sheriff's, prison, system needs to make shifts required by the amendment. So again, that last 15% of the money could also be dedicated to things like drug courts. So our drug courts are definitely not going away. There'll be shifts. You know, one of the biggest shifts is we don't need to label people as felons in order to get them the help they need, right? They might have to get misdemeanors, but maybe not felonies. The other thing I want to, separate apart, I know there's a lot, I apologize if I've confused anyone here tonight, and if the amendment's got a lot of details in it, it's because we thought a lot about it and did a lot of research. But the probation violations, when someone violates probation, they can be sent to jail. Okay, so if someone, under amendment, commits a drug possession misdemeanor, now they used to be felonies, we're going to reclassify them as misdemeanor. We say you can't send them to jail, you have to put them on probation. There's a separate part of the amendment which says probation violations cannot be sent to state prison, but probation violations can be sent to local jail. So this may happen, I don't know, but I do imagine we actually figured this into our calculations, that a lot of judges will be like, okay, I'll put you on probation and I will violate you in a hot second. Because probation violations actually have very low standards of evidence. It's very easy to prove a probation violation. Any defense attorney knows that. If you walk into court and it's done. So probation violations can happen, including domestic violence threats, which could even be telephone harassment, which is a separate independent offense. So that could also result in a domestic violence person being locked up for something separate from, that is actually a new crime. Again, probation violations that are not new crimes cannot be sent to state prison. Probation violations that are new crimes can be sent to state prison. So that could happen under domestic violence or other things. And again, the implementation thing, it does apply to a broad swath of people because it works. We're only doing, our University of Cincinnati just completed a very thorough program evaluation of all the programs in Ohio's state prison system. They have some of the best quality programs, even if we have low capacity. So we know not a lot of people are going to get the kind of credit we allow for in the amendment just because it's hard to get into the programs. But those that do, the University of Cincinnati has measured things like recidivism rates and what's effective at protecting public safety. We're investing in the programs that work, and we want those for as many offenders as we can possibly put them in. Be that as it may, again, with implementation legislation, our amendment requires credit to be given for people that participate in programs, but it doesn't guarantee access to programs. We can argue that back and forth, but it does not guarantee access. What that means is, again, implementation legislation. Legislature has to do all kinds of things. It could say, we're going to limit who has access to programming. I hope they don't restrict that dramatically. I hope they, allow a lot of people to take the programs that turn their lives around. But if we have a serious concern about certain people participating in programs, they don't have to get access, or they have limited access, or something like that. Those are the kinds of things that can happen. I'm not advocating for that by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm saying that's yet another example of there are all kinds of things that legislation can do that will be possible once this is implemented. Last thing, we are definitely not the most lenient, we will definitely not be the most lenient state in the country. 11 states in this country have laws where nearly all drug possession is a misdemeanor, and this guy has not fallen. Their overdose rates are not higher than ours. Ours are the worst, or one of the worst in the country. There's no correspondence between overdose deaths, crime rates, other measures of social health, and whether or not a state has misdemeanor level drug possession or felony level drug possession. It just doesn't match. What we're trying to do is put less punishment and pain in people's lives that is mostly a result of drug addiction. We want to take those resources out of a failed prison system and put them into a healing system that will turn more lives around and produce more public safety for all of us. Thanks.
I'd like Mandy to.
Oh, sorry, she had 1 minute. Oh, yeah, 1 minute. Yeah.
So I just wanted to respond to the domestic violence thing real quick. I am a survivor of domestic violence, and specifically, it triggers me when people say that the only way to handle domestic violence is by incarcerating those who are the perpetrators. Because anyone who's actually survived domestic violence knows that you don't call the cops every time you get hit. You just know that's not true. You also know that the person who is harming you, you love, and you want them to get healthy, and you want them to get healed, and you want them to actually find out what's actually triggering them inside of themselves so that they can be productive members of society as well. So when I hear the domestic violence line being toted around this issue 1 bill, not a bill, amendment, you're right, the amendment, it to me is fear mongering. It's fear mongering, because it doesn't actually make me feel safer. It just makes me feel more afraid. When you lock someone up in jail, it doesn't, again, like, it doesn't heal them. It doesn't heal them. So we need to expand access to mental health services. We need to expand access to anger management treatment facilities. We need to expand access to ways that we're actually restoring people instead of just throwing them away. Because my abuser was hurt himself. And most people who hurt other people have been hurt themselves. And again, as someone who survived domestic violence, I still believe that there's hope for him. And I still believe that he deserves to be restored. And he deserves to have access to treatment. And he deserves to have his mental health issues checked, you know? He deserves that. But if we keep putting all of our money into this bloated prison system, instead of where we actually need it to restore our communities so we can have a safe and healthy Ohio, then we're gonna keep getting more of the same things that we've been getting for the past 50 years. It doesn't work.
Okay, I would like Mindy to talk about drug courts, but hold on just a minute. Give me 4 minutes just to rebut what he had to say. What? Okay, so you want this constitutional amendment because the legislature hasn't done anything for years and years and you're tired of it, and so the people will speak and we're gonna pass this. And yet, you just ended with saying, well, if this passes, the legislature's gonna have to get involved and they're gonna have to fix things and change things and set things and make new. Okay, what? That's the legislature that you said that hasn't done anything for years, that isn't passing anything, and then you're gonna go back to them and let them fix this and change this and make this right? I think you're talking out of both sides of your mouth. The problem is, the legislature shouldn't have to go back and fix this and set the guidelines or set the mandates that are projected in this amendment, because this amendment isn't right. It's not right. It's not complete. It's inaccurate. You haven't responded to the fact that other people than murderer, rapists, and child molesters can get out on these half-time things, and domestic violence, quite honestly, domestic violence is a terrible thing. I was a prosecutor for a long time. I dealt with so many cases, I don't even want to get into that, but, you know, the first domestic violence is a misdemeanor. It's gotta be a felony after it's repeated, and domestic violence people don't go to prison unless, you know, it's really bad, and they've done really bad things to the victim and they have a history. It's not like we send people to prison all the time. The people that are going to prison are people who are violent and are dangerous to society. That's who are there, and they should stay there and do their time there and serve their penalty. I'm not about throwing them away. Yes, reentry programs are wonderful. This amendment is not the way to go. Secondly, I wanted to say the grant money, it's not clear how this grant money is gonna go. You can apply for it, it doesn't mean you get it. The first year, there may be some savings of not so many people there, but the next year, the savings are gonna be gone. We're not gonna have money from the federal department to trickle down to the states and to the communities. It's gonna fall on the local communities to fund these programs, which we don't have enough money to, and how do you decide where the funding's gonna go? There's gonna be a fight for those. So I'm not sure that the money that they think is gonna be saved will actually be saved the way that they think it is. I have huge concerns about that. And I can't read my writing, but I'll pass it on to you.
Hi, I'm Medea Reinhardt. I'm the prosecutor for drug court. I'm going to start. I can only speak for Hamilton County. I don't know what the rest of the state is doing, but in Hamilton County drug court, we don't make felons. You get into drug court, F4, F5 possessions. We don't take anybody with a violent past or drug trafficking, anything of that nature. But we take more than possession. We take thefts, forgeries, things that lead there. You know, you have a drug problem, so you're forging a prescription, or you're altering prescription, or you're stealing from your family, or your job, or your coworkers. So we have more than just possession in our drug court. If you do not have a record in our drug court, if you're successful, you get what's called treatment in lieu of conviction, which means you get no felony. It goes completely away. Some people don't complete it successfully, but trust me, come watch Judge Kim Burke. She's the judge that's done it for at least a decade, room 500 of the courthouse. You have to really, really, really try to fail at drug court. I mean, you have to repeatedly flunk probation, repeatedly test positive, or just not showing up or not doing anything to actually flunk your programming at drug court. We have multiple institutions from the Talbert House, the jail rewards programs, River City, multiple of that kind of things. Right off the bat, if you don't want drug court, you roll out. And then you can go choose to be a felon in another courtroom where you will get convicted. But if you want treatment, it's here in Hamilton County. You just have to ask for it. Also, another thing is people don't know, we get a lot of people coming across state lines to buy their drugs. So we get a lot of Kentucky residents, Indiana residents. Unfortunately, they cannot do our programs because of the way the funding is tied up. But if they choose to do a program, and a lot of this is covered by Medicaid, Medicare, things of that nature, or privately, even through their insurance, if they choose to do a program, successfully complete it, and are doing urine screens and testing negative, Judge Burke will give them a misdemeanor of the first degree, because if they'd been in Ohio, they would have not had a charge at all. So if they would have qualified in Ohio, if you live in another state, she does give them a misdemeanor of the first degree. So in Hamilton County, if you want the help, you are not becoming a felon. And they're completely right. Due to recent legislation and some stuff the governor's done, we can't send people to prison with F4s, F5s. We can't. We're not allowed to. So nobody of that level is going to prison anyhow on just that charge. Now maybe they have other charges tied to it. Maybe they were on probation and then picked this up. That's a whole other story. But for those level offenses, we're not sending you to prison, at least in Hamilton County. And as you all know, in our county, there is no room at the inn. Justice Center. So a lot of these people, if they do get put in the Justice Center, are getting released anyhow. So saying, oh, we can just send them to jail instead of sending them to prison is a big load of nothing in Hamilton County, because you're not going to get held at the Justice Center. So we're too busy keeping murderers in the Justice Center and releasing a lot of actually violent people, unfortunately, because we just don't have room to house them. So they're not going to keep somebody in the Justice Center who committed a probation violation. That's just not going to happen. So I'd be more than happy to answer any questions later about how drug court works or anything, but I would welcome you all. Come down. It's an open courtroom through 500 at the main courthouse. It's Judge Burke. She loves having people come watch, and you can see for yourself what happens every day.
Every day. Every day. Drug court, all she does is drug court every day.
And I think to sum it up from my point of view, the main difference between our feeling and theirs is that there needs to be a stick also. And that's drug court provides what people say they need. They need treatment. They need an opportunity to get treatment. But what if they don't? What if they say, I'm not doing it? They don't show up. They don't do any of this. I know you said that people don't, sending somebody to jail for being a repeat domestic violence person isn't going to cure them of domestic violence. But guess what? While he's in there, he's not going to hurt that person. And sending somebody to jail for repeated heroin or fentanyl violations, it's not going to cure them of their addiction, but they're probably not going to overdose while in there. And that's, I think, the difference. Drug court is doing just what they want. You've got a drug problem, you get court-ordered treatment, and if you complete it successfully, not only you're not going to jail, your conviction is erased. There's treatment in lieu of conviction. It means instead of getting convicted, you get treatment. But most of these people need something to force them to do it, because they don't want to do it. They want to go out and get high again because of the addiction. So I think that's the main difference, is that there needs to be something to make this happen. It's just like when you get your kids. If you keep telling them over and over not to do something, they keep doing it. They're going to keep doing it unless you whack them eventually, or deny them Burger King or whatever it is. And I know some people shook their head when I said whack them, but hey, I'm sorry. I got whacked as a kid. I spanked my kids. I got paddled at Roger Bacon for something I didn't do, but hey, Father John whacked my ass a couple times, and I never did what he thought I did again. But I mean, sometimes you got to have something. I just saw him at a reunion yesterday, and he still remembers that. So, again, that's just my belief, and I think most people believe at some point you've got to have some repercussions for bad acts, and I think that is what's lacking in this particular bill.
I'm going to take moderator's privilege to allow a little bit of a response, because we've had some flexibility in this. You know, we added an extra speaker, we added some extra time, so I hope you guys will indulge me in that and let both sides have a little bit more time to just, before we go to questions and answers, to have them have some response to what they just heard. So, about 5 minutes or so.
I'll keep it really short. If you have diabetes and your blood sugar's out of whack and you ate the donut, do you need somebody whacking you? If you've got cancer and your cancer comes back, do you need somebody whacking you? Is there any disease for which we whack people in order to get them in line? Except this one? No. Here's one of the saddest things, like, and I believe very much in Judge Lubers and Judge Burke and the people and Mindy, people that are really trying hard to use the system that we have, which is mostly constructed of hammers, to get people better. And there are definitely anecdotes, and I've talked to people that said, you know, like there are, you know, the anecdotes of the person who says, I went to jail and that somehow helped me. The sad reality is the vast majority of stories we don't hear. And the reason you don't hear them is because they're dead. 8 to 10 times, when you send someone to jail, this is a really sad reality, no matter the best of intentions of sending people to jail and trying to get them separated from the addiction or the substance or their lifestyle or whatever, the research shows that when you send someone to jail, even for short stints, they come out of jail, they are 8 to 10 times more likely to die of an overdose when they walk out of jail. That's happened to your friend. This is what happens when we send people to jail. And it's maddening because it feels like, what else do we do? Like, I had nothing else I could do to this person. I had to send them to jail. And yet jail does nothing but dramatically, 8 to 10 times, dramatically exacerbate whatever mental health crisis that person was in that was causing them to use drugs. They come out either less tolerant of the drug or whatever the mental health issue is, and they're dying. So yes, there are the handful that are that we have that maybe were benefited by an incarceration stint. The research shows that it's actually killing people. We have to invest in other responses. That's what issue 1 is about, is investing in things that really heal people. We need to provide more broader options for inpatient lockdown drug treatment. You know, issue 1 says you can't send people to jail, but it doesn't mean you can't send them to a lockdown residential drug treatment program. It's just not a jail cell. So there are all kinds of mandatory things we could send people to if we invested in those things instead of in jail. You know, and indeed, there is no room at the end. 70–80% of our jail population right now is people being held pre-trial, people that haven't been found guilty of anything yet. So if we had a significant bail reform in this community, we would have actually space to hold the people that need to be held. So our jail overcrowding crisis is certainly not caused by anything in issue 1. It's being caused by bail choices being made by our local judiciary. Do you have anything else?
Yeah, I just want to say as well that most of what I feel like I'm hearing right now are responses by law for law. It's not responses by people for the people. Most of what I heard is written by Justice Maureen O'Connor, and it was read almost line by line from what her response is to issue 1. And I feel like it's worth pointing out because I know both of you have your own opinions about issue 1. It might not be Justice Maureen O'Connor's opinion about issue 1. And we all have our own opinions about it, and your opinions aren't my opinions. But I think that it takes us, everyday Ohioans, trying to figure out what's going to work for us instead of allowing the same system that has continuously broken families apart, continuously punished people, continuously ruined lives. Really, I mean, yes, it does protect some people, but it hasn't protected and served all of us. That's just being realistic here. Right now, Hamilton County and Cincinnati, it's 27.7% people living in poverty. A lot of those kids, of those parents who are living in poverty, are living in poverty because their parents can't access treatment. They can't access things that they need for upward mobility because of F4 and F5 drug possession felonies. When I'm out on the street every day talking to people about this issue, when I was out on the street talking about getting signatures to put this ballot measure on the ballot in November, I heard story after story after story about what it actually looked like in real people's lives. So it's really important for us to make sure that the people are the center of this conversation, not the law, not the things that we have always done, but the people. Where are the people's voices in this? 730,031 people across the state of Ohio said yes to this. I am not willing to let fear of change stop it from happening. I'm just not.
I think we lost the battery or something.
Time is up. We lost the battery?
I don't know. Do I hold the button?
I think it's dead.
All right, I apologize for this. Do you want to say anything briefly and then we'll go to Q&A?
Not after they sabotage the microphone.
That was not on purpose. It was divine order. No.
There we go. All right, so we have some time for a few questions, and what we'll do is, because we don't have the mic, say it loud, and then I will repeat it, and then if you have somebody particular you're directing it to, say so. Otherwise, we'll just allow them to all answer. Questions? Sarah?
Yeah, I wondered if Stephen Elizabeth could address some of the judge's concern. One was about the drug courts, what they do now, and people are not getting felonies. They are not actually getting felonies in there, but they're getting treatment, and the treatment is, and I guess you also said they could get treatment all over town, and which I didn't. And you're saying that there isn't treatment, they're saying there is treatment. And I'd like to kind of have you address that.
Sure.
So let me repeat Sarah's question. Sarah asked Stephen and Elizabeth to respond to the judge and the probation drug court person to talk about is it or is it not true that you do get a felony for drug possession, and is it not true that there is or is not treatment available, and do you go to prison or not? Is that accurate?
Sort of, yeah.
All right.
Okay, so if that's true, that's great. I mean, I've talked to a couple counties where there are counties where they're saying, well, we don't do this at all. We don't, we don't give people felonies. We don't give people we only give them misdemeanors. We're sending them to treatment. We're not sending them to jail or prison. And I'm like, great. That's what issue one's going to be easy for you because that's what you're already doing, right? So if that's true, then wonderful. For the counties that aren't doing that, and there are a heck of a lot of them, we have 88. Then we definitely need to move along the lines that they're talking about of less punishment, less criminalization, more access to treatment. All about that. Again, issue one creates resources that could possibly fund drug courts. So I'm very much in favor of that, and I hope that we keep helping Mindy do what she does.
The other thing I meant to mention, what about the carrot and stick? I think that's, a lot of people have said this, that they're concerned that there's no way to make people go into treatment.
We went back and forth about this. Do people have to want it and be in the mode of like, I want to get healed, or do we have to force them and threaten them into it? And there was some tension tonight around that. In fact, both of us said both of it. I mean, really, we were both talking about like how much force is necessary and how much do people just have to want it instinctively and natively. I don't know, you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So I think one, not everyone gets offered drug court. A lot of the people that I know who are my friends were not offered drug court. I talked to 3 people yesterday who are in active recovery right now who have drug possession felonies and were not offered drug court. So it's not like every single person gets offered drug court in Hamilton County or in the state of Ohio. But it's also very true that you do have to want to get clean, and you do have to want to go through recovery. But that doesn't just happen because the system is forcing you into it. It happens because there are people around you who are surrounding you and saying that you're actually worth something, and then you start to believe it yourself, right? So my friends who are currently in recovery finally believed that they were worth something. But it wasn't because they saw Judge Burke, and it wasn't because they ended up getting picked up with heroin possession. It wasn't because of any of those things. It was because they were treated like human beings. And for lots of people who have been inside of the system, we know that the system doesn't treat everyone equally. We also know that the system doesn't treat everyone like a human being. I think the intentions are good, but I also think that it's time for us to recreate something. And for me, issue one is the recreation of what it looks like for us to be with a mic again.
Okay.
City Club rocks.
Do you want to answer anything about to that question, or shall I go to the next question?
I would say, look, we have treatment. We have treatment programs. We have a lot of treatment programs that we put people into. It would be the same treatment programs that you go to, whether it's court ordered or not. People are with people in treatment who are not, have not come to court, or who have voluntarily gone into treatment. It's the same treatment program. Either you're going to successfully complete it or not. We would like to say, hey, if we dangle this over your head, for some people that works. Some people it does not, but we're just trying. If we can save a few people because we dangled this over their head and said you're not going to prison, then I'm all for it. We are on the same page that we want reform. We do. We want to help people. We do. It's a huge problem. I don't disagree with them at all. I just don't like this amendment. I think there's a lot of things in this amendment that are not right, that are not fair, that don't have anything to do with treating people with drug problems. And that's the issue that I have. This is not the way to go. We need to do something, I totally agree. But this amendment is not the way to go.
Other questions? In the back.
Yeah, I just hear a lot of like, we agree with it, we're on the same page, and I've spoken to a lot of people, I've been doing a lot of research on issue one, who say that like, even if they have private health insurance, they can't get a bed at a treatment facility, and we just need more resources. So I just love to hear the side offer, what are the solutions? Like, where will we get these resources? Where will we get more treatment beds without issue one? Are there other viable solutions?
Exactly. You may be able to get more treatment.
Let me just repeat the question, sorry. Yeah. Yeah, for the live streamer. So her question was, we're hearing from people who are not able to obtain treatment. So she asked, where do the resources for additional treatment come from without issue one? Is that accurate?
Or what are the other viable solutions? If you agree with the sentiment, but this isn't the way, what is the way?
What is the viable solution?
I don't know what the viable solution is, I just know it's not. I don't know what the viable solution is, I haven't written an amendment myself, and I would not. I like to trust the people that we elect in the legislature, that they will do the right thing and make the laws. You know, maybe not. But this amendment covers so many things that it's not just about getting treatment for people. Quite honestly, I'm not convinced that the numbers that they have, that they're gonna have the money to supply these programs that they say they're gonna do. They will save some money the first year, absolutely, but not the money that I think that they project that they're gonna have. And again, the federal money's gonna be gone, and it's gonna be on the local people to fund it. And the problem is funding. If I could wave a wand and hit a bazillion dollars and could do treatment for every single person that not just wanted it, but needed it, I would do it. We need that. That would be ideal. That would be superb. In the reality of this world, we do not have that. We don't. So I just don't think the money's there. I just don't like this amendment because there's too many things, there's too many loose ends. There's things in here that are not about getting people treatment for rehab, for possession. There are other things that I don't agree with. That's why I think this particular amendment is not good. If it just said, look, if you have a possession of marijuana or a certain amount of cocaine and it should be a misdemeanor and you're going into treatment, I'm all for that. But if you have fentanyl and you just get to walk out, no, fentanyl that can kill people, or heroin that can kill people, or that you automatically get this jail time credit, that if you're on probation, that I don't have the option of sending you to jail or prison. There are other things in this bill. Read the whole bill. Read the entire bill. It's 4 pages long. It's not just about getting people treatment for drugs.
Mr. Piedmont, did you have any?
I'm just like Mindy, I think, wanted to, and you said you had some friends that were not offered drug court. If you could just clarify anything else you want to say, but how do I get into drug court and why would I not get into drug court?
Absolutely every F4, F5 that you are arrested on is automatically rolled for drug possession, is automatically rolled to Judge Burke, automatically. You get kicked out because I review your file and your record says, A, you were actually selling drugs based upon the fact pattern, or B, you have violent offenses in your past and you technically don't qualify for drug court. So I've had aggravated robbery, I've had drug traffickers, I've had sex offenders, I've had people with vehicular assault, I've had all kinds of things on their past record that would disqualify them under federal guidelines for drug court. But automatically every F4, F5, that's what I do every Thursday and Friday, is come through all the new files that just came in, go through your records, see who actually qualifies and who doesn't. After that, if you qualify, it's up to you and your attorney whether you want to stay in drug court. So you don't have to stay. You can, like I said, you can choose to not do the program, not participate. You can choose to be rolled out to another judge. So in Hamilton County, like I said, I don't know about other counties, but in Hamilton County, you are automatically rolled to drug court for possession charges. And then as far as the funding question, drug court and the drug court programs are federally funded. If there is no felony drug court, there is no federal funding. So all of the programs that exist through drug court right now, the Talbot House, ADAPT, those programs would not exist for our purposes. They might exist for private clients with insurance or things of that nature, but that funding would go away immediately. I don't know if they would do something new and come up with funding for misdemeanor drug court, which is not something that exists right now. There is no such thing. We might have to create one if something like this passes, I don't know. But right now, all of drug court funding is federal funded. So that would all disappear if drug court
I thought you said that they weren't cited as felons.
It's felony court. You're originally charged as a felony, but if you complete the program, your charge goes away. So if there's no felonies for drug possession, then there's no felony drug court. It would disappear.
It's like you're found not guilty.
Yes. If you complete the program, it's like you're found not guilty. It's taken off your record. So yeah, it's dismissed. But yeah.
We have a woman in the blue and white right here.
Let me just ask you something kind of practical. So we passed the constitutional amendment. What happens next? some court or some doesn't do what the amendment says, so they appeal it, and they go all the way to the, I mean, what do you do? What actually happens to implement this?
30 days after. Sure. Oh, the question was, what happens after, if this was to be approved? What happens? Like, what happens next? Practically speaking, what happens next? And the answer is 30 days by law. After an amendment is approved by the voters, it goes into effect. That is the law of Ohio. So if a judge said, I'm not going to follow the law of Ohio, you're right. The individual defendant would appeal that and would win because the law trumps whatever an individual judge decides is not the law. But that's how the Constitution works, right?
Okay,
That's practically
so what does the
speaking.
legislature fix?
So the legislature can pass statutes. For example, if we have an issue about whether or not we're able to prosecute fentanyl traffickers the way we want to, we can define trafficking in a way that's easier to prove, right? That makes it even easier for Mr. Pietmeyer and others to prove trafficking.
But there's nothing in the statute that has anything to do with that. I mean, there's
No,
a constitutional amendment.
Correct. We don't have that in the amendment.
Okay, but what I'm asking is, what in this amendment does the legislature have to do to implement anything?
So
or does it?
For example, the legislature has to pass laws regarding the funding, right? When money is allocated according to this amendment, the legislature is one that writes the budget every year. Right. So they're the one that has to sign off on that, and they have to follow what the rules and guidelines are in this for that. If they want to, they are not required to, but if they wanted to, they could implement other legislation that would enhance or complement what is in this amendment, such as I said, trafficking, such as if they wanted to do laws around access to programming in prison to govern how this earned credit works. There are parts of the amendment that are immovable. There are parts that are like, this is black letter law, you can't change this, but there is space in this amendment also to tweak things as needed, as time goes forward, to make that the legislature can control the legislation to make it work right for Ohio.
That, our legislature doesn't have a great history.
They don't have a great history, and that's right. Darn straight. So that is why, first of all, I'm not going away. Neither is Elizabeth. We're going to be in Columbus every day of the week, advocating for this darn thing in the implementation phase. There's a whole team of people working on implementation. The legislature has a terrible record. That's what I talked about, as Judge Luber rightly pointed out. Is that on the one hand, I'm saying I don't trust the legislature. They haven't done enough, and they haven't. But what I'm also saying is, we can't give up on the legislature completely. They have a job to do. They have to write laws, right? And so after the amendment goes into effect, there is going to be implementation legislation. That is always the case. That is always the case with every constitutional amendment that's ever been passed. So we have to work somehow within we're putting guardrails on a legislature that likes to go this way, okay? That's what Amendment 1 does. The legislature is refusing to take the money out of a failed prison system and put it into healing. We're forcing them to do that. Once we force them to do that, yeah, there's still going to be some space in there, but we put up fences that says you can't go off and just start spending money willy-nilly. You can't go off throwing people in prison like you always like to do. We are requiring you to redirect people and money out of prison and into healing.
So you had a question, the woman in green?
Yeah, and it kind of goes back to, it steers away a little bit from this issue, but goes back to what Mindy said. And this is just a really quick question, and then I have a second question, it's a little bit longer. But do you have specific statistics on those who actually finish this treatment program that you're speaking of?
Who are you addressing that to?
Mindy, sorry. Mindy or anyone on the opposition. Like, is there actual statistics for who this works for? Like, do you track that?
I'm sure someone tracks that. I do not know anything like that off the top of my head. I can only tell you what I've seen. I'd say out of the people enrolled in drug court, probably a quarter of them choose to not participate and roll out to another judge. It's probably about 25% right off the bat decide I either don't have the time to do this, because drug court's hard. I mean, Judge Burke makes you do urine tests 3 times a week, and those are very limited hours, and if you have a job, it's hard. So there are challenges to it sometimes.
Right, so what would you say is the success rate?
It's really hard because sometimes it depends on what you define as success. Is success that the person's still alive 2 years later?
So let's say alive, completed the program.
I'd probably say another 25 to 40% complete the program and don't have a felony. And then there's that small fraction in the middle that picks up new charges and comes back to drug court. We have people who actually have completed drug court, and then 2 years down the road, they pick, and Judge Burke remembers them, but 2 years down the road, they pick up another possession charge and they're back in drug court. Now that time, they don't get the benefit of treatment in lieu because they already got it once, but they can still do the programs. And they can still have access to the treatment if they want it. She's more than happy to take anybody that wants to get help. And sometimes she's more than happy to take people who don't want to get help, and she'll make them get help, because that's Judge Burke. So she's very much about making you get the things you need, whether you want them or not. So just off my guess, that's probably about where, and then we do have that small fraction that sadly shows up on, we have an overdose list. And there are those people who show up on that, and it's for all the reasons like I'm sorry, I don't remember her name at the end, but the young lady at the end, Judge Burke let them out of the Justice Center and they'll go and OD that weekend. She doesn't let hardly anybody out on a Friday, because she knows if she lets you out on a Friday, she's not gonna see you on Monday. So she usually will hold people over the weekend, just for the triggers that it associates with it being a weekend. So we do have that percentage of people who show up on the overdose list. And I do those nollies. I've probably done 20 in the last year of people that have passed away while they were in drug court. So whether they overdosed or other complications from drug use, but I've probably had about 20 die in the last year. So.
Yes, are most out on bond, or are most?
It's very, when you first get.
You can answer my question.
I'm sorry, he wanted to know if most people were out on bond or locked up. With Judge Burke, when you initially roll in, she usually lets you out because she wants to make sure that you will show up, that you're willing to participate. So she'll make you do urine screens for about 2 weeks, get a baseline for what you're taking and how much you're taking. She then has you talk to a treatment provider who's in our courtroom every day, someone from the treatment programs. That person assesses you and decides whether you're okay to be left out, that you're not in immediate crisis, or that you need to be put in a treatment facility, a residential assessment. So sometimes they'll go in for residential assessment. It says you need to stay in a facility, whether that's a jail facility or a Talbert House or a DAPT or one of our other programs. Or sometimes it says, you know what, they're okay, they've already had some treatment, they're okay with an outpatient assessment. So we have people out, we don't have people just sitting in the jail. The only people in the jail are people who are on probation and have basically just not cooperated and usually get locked up for a night. She calls it TI, therapeutic incarceration. So you get a night of sit down and think about what you're doing, I'll see you tomorrow. So that's kind of her thing. She rarely keeps people locked up. The only people who stay locked up on our docket are people who have disappeared for a while and they have a warrant out for their arrest, and then we pick them up and they sit for a couple weeks till they roll onto the docket. But in general, you are out participating in some kind of treatment, whether it's your own treatment, like if you're from another state and you do your own program, or it's an inpatient or an outpatient treatment program that we provide access to.
Okay.
Well, and my question wasn't about access to treatment, it was just about success. And I would say success probably doesn't, in my opinion personally, and I hope the opinion of the room is not just defined by dead or alive. I would hope that it would mean alive and well.
Sadly, at this point with opioids, though, alive.
So my other question was for Jody, actually. At the very beginning, you gave fentanyl facts, and you came back and reiterated this again. So I specifically, I don't know how often people hear about fentanyl, but my own experience is hearing about it being accidentally consumed by somebody who has purchased marijuana. And based on what you said, just blanket possession of fentanyl, you're going to jail, you're going to prison. But what if I am that person that bought that marijuana and I have that possession of fentanyl on me now? Do I go to prison automatically based on my accident? And then if I don't, couldn't I, if I knew that I was buying fentanyl, that I knew that I had the possession, then couldn't I use it against you and say, you know, oh, well, I was just buying weed, it was just an accident. So based on that, like, second time offense that you said, okay, go ahead.
So
it was just for clarity on the fentanyl.
If fentanyl is purchased
issue.
With another drug?
On accident,
On
yes.
accident. How does that relate to what Judge Lubers was speaking about in terms of
right, laced with heroin, with marijuana, whatever it is.
So either you plead guilty or you plead not guilty and you go to trial, and either you're found guilty or you're found not guilty. Okay, so you either admit it or you're found guilty of it, or you're not. Okay, but we do not send drug possession people to prison. First of all,
did
I'm
say
not.
possession of fentanyl, you do.
I'm
so
not,
now
oh
you're-
God, no, I'm not. I'm not allowed. I'm not allowed to.
That's why I asked to
It's a
clarify.
felony 4, it might be a felony 5. I'm not allowed by statute, by the legislation telling me I'm not allowed to send them to prison right now without this amendment. Not allowed to. I don't.
So then if, I guess I'm relating that then to when you said violating probation.
Right.
So I violate probation by purchasing
And you
heroin,
picked up
marijuana,
a
that
new
is laced
offense?
with fentanyl.
So you're on probation to me for a drug offense, and now you've picked up a second drug offense?
Yes, but possession of, and in this issue, obviously, you would be found innocent of felony. You would be taken down to a misdemeanor. But in your opinion, then if it was possession of fentanyl, you would automatically go back to prison.
No, you don't automatically go to
Does
prison.
this make sense? I'm sorry
No.
if the way I'm asking it
I'm
is
sorry, I don't
not
understand
correct.
you. You don't ever automatically go to prison ever, unless you
I don't
commit a
mean
murder or a
mean
rape.
that. I'm sorry that I used that as a.
Okay, we're
word,
gonna,
but I-
maybe you two can
yeah.
talk after.
No, but
Happy
it
to
was
talk
just
to
a clarity issue for the room of the fentanyl. I would like you to say exactly what you meant by that, but it's okay.
Jane, you had a question.
Well, interestingly enough, it's a fentanyl question.
Okay, so maybe you can clarify, yeah.
And
thank you.
I really learned a lot of both sides' presentations, but I've got a lot of questions. And the fentanyl issue is the amount set, that's the limit that makes the difference, set in this amendment? And it seems kind of high, given the nature of fentanyl and the consequences of what happens to you when you consume fentanyl. Why would it have been set as high as it's been set in the amendment?
The amendment says that it is the F4 and F5 levels and quantities for any substance that were in place as of January 1st. We turned it, for what it's worth, we turned in our language on November 1st, in middle of November of 2017. The legislature, there was a bill pending called Senate Bill 1, which, if you just about the legislature, Senate Bill 1 means it's the very first thing the legislature introduced in January of 2017, so last year. Everyone thought, boy, this fentanyl thing's a big deal. They're going to pass that bill really quick. Surprisingly, they didn't. They didn't pass it until July of this year, and then the governor signed it in August. So what Senate Bill 1 does is it lowers the threshold for fentanyl. It says that fentanyl possession for an F4 will only be less than 1 gram. For F5 will be between 1 and 5 grams. So, but as of January 1st, which is what our amendment says, the fentanyl, at that point, the legislature had not yet gotten the message and hadn't fixed this issue with fentanyl. So the threshold for fentanyl was 20 grams. There was an F5 level fentanyl was 20 grams, anything less than 20 grams. There was no F4, oddly, and then it was basically 20 grams or more was an F3, F2, F1, on up like that. So what our amendment says is, indeed, it was because we knew that the legislature could go around and basically take all crimes out of the F4, F5 level if they really hated our amendment, if we didn't put a stake in the ground. If we didn't say as of a certain date, whatever the felony levels were as of that date. Otherwise, the legislature could erase the entire amendment by legislation. And we did not, we wanted them to work on implementation, but not to erase the entire amendment by taking all the drug possession felonies up to some higher F3 level, let's say. So that's why we picked a date and picked an amount that was set as was a particular date, January 1st, 2018, earlier this year. And again, I just want to say, that's for possession only. People are getting charged, convicted, and put in prison for trafficking every day of this week by state and federal prosecutors for far less than 20 grams. So trafficking will be treated as trafficking. It's really just simple possession that we're talking about.
David.
I certainly don't want to digress or dilute the topic here, but I believe that bail reform will significantly help break the cycle of poverty.
Okay.
How does bail reform fit into this?
Well, bail reform is connected. It's not part of issue 1 particularly, but it's basically, bail reform is saying that we should send fewer people into the local jail because they're too poor to pay. There are lots of examples around the country, cities and whole states that have implemented systems to prevent most people from being held pre-trial just because they're too poor to pay a bond. Those states have not seen dramatic upticks in violent crime or any kind of pre-trial crime. And they use instruments like their risk assessments. I won't go into a lot of the detail, it gets down to the weeds a bit. But what those programs can do is cut our pre-trial population again. 70 to 80 for any given night, right now, There are people sleeping on plastic boats, they call them boats. They're like sled, you know those plastic sleds your kids would sled? People are sleeping in those tonight in hallways. That is not safe for them or the guards. It's a really dangerous environment in our local county jail because of that overcrowding. And it doesn't need to be that way. There are all kinds of safe ways we could have fewer people in local jail so that we could hold the correct people in there.
Just real quick though, is local legislation more realistic or should it be a state issue?
So right now, AMOS is working on bail reform with Ohio Justice and Policy Center. And I would definitely say if you're interested, then come talk to me afterwards and I'll get you plugged in. Because we do know that in Hamilton County, we are completely overcrowded. Our jail's completely overcrowded. And so when we talk about like violent criminals not having a place, like you were saying, Mendy, like there's no room in the jail, there's no room in the inn. And bail reform is one of those ways that we're able to actually answer that question of like, where do we keep people who are violent, who do actually need to be removed from society for a time. You know, what does that time look like? It's still up in the air, but yeah. So if you're interested, I would love it.
Judge Luber, did you want to speak on that at all, or should we move on?
I wasn't. Bail reform is a whole different topic.
Oh,
right?
whole different topic. Okay, well that's perfect because look what time it is. 8:30.
You don't gotta go home, but you can't stay.
But Amy is put this whole program together, so I'm going to let her say something brief.
I wasn't going to summarize, I was going to ask another question.
Well, it's 8:30.
It's 8:30. Okay, I want to, can we thank our speakers, please, for really giving us the useful information?
People really look at this and address it. And my future question will be whether or not how this amendment will affect the federal money to drug courts.
So that's the question for another day. Thank you.
That is
Thank you, everyone.
That's the only thing. Thank you so much for streaming.
My pleasure.
You certainly did get a lot of information. Thank you.
There was a lot in there.
Say,
You thought